You are listening to NFL Team Breakdowns on the National Sports Radio Station and on Spreaker.com.
Yeah, I'm the only one to get the job done. I don't know if you can cover for me. Yeah, got some game from my dad. Said she might say she love me, she don't love me like she say she love me. Believe me. I didn't know boy they love me in the street. I'm not trying to find nobody else to beat. I know one they couldn't see because they are. Believe me. Yeah. Real. It's been me and Young Tune off the rip.
The Chicago Bears a year ago in the 2013 campaign went 8-8, the second ranked offense in the NFL, but couldn't get the job done just because of the defense. The defense really lacked actually against the rush, and that was something that was really disappointing to me to watch, but nevertheless, the Chicago Bears didn't have a losing record, didn't have a winning record, but went 8-8. I'm Robert Deers alongside me, Nick Rice, for another great edition of NFL Team Breakdowns. And Nick, covering this NFC North, it's been interesting with the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, nobody expected them to be in the race or in the runnings, mind you, for the NFL or NFC North there and fight for the playoffs. So if that was the case, it came down to the final moments of the final game of the season. And, I mean, true to form, that defense didn't exactly come with the big play down the stretch. They had the lead. The offense pulls way out in front, and then the Bears on the defensive end just let the Packers back in. And that Randall Cobb touchdown connection just sort of iced what has been a ice-cold month for the Bears. When things got frigid down in Chicago, that was where they really struggled. But when you take a look at this upcoming season, under the second year reign of Mark Trestman as the head man for the Bears, signs are really looking up for Chicago to not only repeat as a real tough contender in that division, but even fight for a trip to the playoffs. They certainly have a big-time opportunity to do just that. And I'm excited for this coming Bears season because there's so much potential, even on the defensive side where they rank towards the bottom of the league. I mean, there are some big-time names there and players that can really play.
And Jay Cutler wasn't as bad as a quarterback. Yes, he got injured during the season, and Josh McCown really had to step up during that role. And he didn't do that bad. He got a win over Green Bay. Let's remember that. But Aaron Rodgers was, I believe, hurt during that time. And then he got a win over Baltimore. Baltimore really struggled, but they won it in overtime. And Josh McCown actually got a big win over Dallas, 45-28. So not too bad for this young star, but lost at Washington, 45-41. Nick, and what we talked about before the show was how close their wins were, like 24-21, 31-30, also a 23-20, and 38-31, and a 27-20. But Nick, probably the worst loss they had this season was probably the one at home versus Green Bay, the game that could have potentially put them in the playoffs and made them a 9-7 team.
It would have put them in the playoffs. I mean, just overall, you mentioned a lot of the close games, and that's the problem with having such a great offense, but having absolutely no defense. And, I mean, I don't understand last year how they played so horribly. There were only two teams that gave up more points than them. 29.9 points per game isn't going to beat a whole lot of people unless the offense is as good as what Chicago embodies. I mean, people don't understand exactly how good this offense is. The Denver Broncos set the NFL record for most points in a game, or most points in a season, touchdowns, the whole 9 yards. But how about the next best offense in the league? It's not the Packers, the Saints, Patriots. It's the Chicago Bears. It's very interesting on the statistical side, and they rank top 5 in passing and even top 10 in running the football. I mean, not many people look at Matt Forte and talk about him as a top 5 running back. Well, his statistics suggest that he has top 5 or top 8 numbers. So it's very interesting what to expect. But, I mean, the defense just has to play better. They have more potential than what is 30th in the league and 32nd against the run. 162 rushing yards allowed per game. That is just out of control.
And Nick, Matt Forte ran the football in for the touchdown 9 times last season and went over 1,250 yards in rushing. Give this man credit. And he really had to lead that offense. Josh McCown, he had to come in just for Jay Cutler, but Matt Forte, man, he was the guy carrying the load for that squad a year ago.
Yeah, this was definitely a team led by a 1-2 punch, not only in the running game, but also in the receiving game. As you take a look at potentially the top receiving core in the NFL with Brandon Marshall, Alshon Jeffrey, and even throw in a Josh Morgan, who had it spent his last year with the Washington Redskins. He's been bounced around from team to team. A lot of people know him as a San Francisco 49er, though. Robert, I'm sure you know more about this guy. 1-2-3 punch there in Chicago.
Nick, I'm gonna really like how they got Josh Morgan, the free agency. Josh Morgan during the 49ers season during his 49er campaign was part of the era where it wasn't very good. That was with Alex Smith was struggling and couldn't really win a game, but I'm glad he went to the Washington Redskins, really helped out in RG3, but I think now what Josh Morgan is going to, he's going to a quarterback that can actually pass the ball and could really I think he's going to have a lot of receptions. I think he's going to get about 70 this year. And Nick, they got Alshon Jeffrey and Brandon Marshall. And Brandon Marshall had 100 receptions this year. Pretty damn amazing for that wide receiver. And Nick, he has a lot of potential, and he just signed a big contract actually over this offseason.
Yeah, it's interesting to see exactly what is in store for this team. I mean, it's hard to make players like Marshall and Jeffrey happy with how many times they can catch the football, but Jay Cutler did a really nice job spreading the ball around to all of his receivers. And also when you take a look at the tight end, another player that can snag a lot of targets, actually 2 of them, in Zach Miller and Martellus Bennett, who are the penciled 1 and 2 starters there for the Bears this coming season. I mean, Cutler just has toys to play with, more candy than at a candy store when you're talking about the options that this young man has. And listen, he's done a really nice job. Now, Cutler was part of the dilemma involved with Denver, and personally, I thought Cutler was a top 10 quarterback. I didn't understand why the Broncos let him go. Chicago realized that, and they brought him on board, and he's been a really nice player for them. And now, when we talk about Matt Forte as well, the running back for Chicago, I mean, he's not a guy that's going to surprise you. He's not a guy that's going to show you some top-end speed like a LaShawn McCoy or an Adrian Peterson, but he has a mix of power and finesse, which, Robert, actually is kind of it's a rare breed in the NFL to have that. In my mind, I think that makes him a really good player.
Nick, Jay Cutler wasn't a bad player, and a lot of people, some people are saying, he might have gotten overpaid. Well, can he make the playoffs? I think if this team just gets the defense together, I think the Chicago Bears are actually going to be a playoff team. A lot of people are saying, they're going to lose a lot of games, and I think the Bears have a good shot this year. I think as long as they work hard enough, and they have the wide receiver core, the tight ends aren't too bad. They have a great running game, and the passing, man, Jay Cutler knew how to pass the ball. So it's not like they have an issue with quarterbacks. Yes, he got injured. Josh McCown came in, didn't do that bad of a job. But, the O-line, and that O-line actually, let's talk about that. The right side, they actually have 2 rookies. They actually had 2 rookies on the right side this season that had to step up. And it was tough because when you're adding 2 new players to that O-line, you're not going to expect high expectations from that O-line, but they actually didn't do too bad. But 19 sacks for Jay Cutler, but then let's remember 11 for Josh McCown. It's still not too bad when you add it up.
Yeah, obviously this is a team that just has firepower all over the place. Robert, I would like to get your thoughts on the new free agent acquisitions. I'm sure we'll go more in depth on this a little later. But they had some great guys who left town, and you bring them back in with, I believe, the same amount of talent, if not better. When you take a look, starting at the defensive line, to take away a Henry Melton and a Julius Peppers, who are two really good players and longtime veterans for Chicago. But you throw in Jared Allen, Jay Ratliff, and Lamar Houston at the defensive front. Just that alone makes me believe that Chicago, while they were plagued with a salary cap issue, they are a team that is willing to pay its players and are willing to do the best that they can to win. And I think throwing in a Lamar Houston and one of the better players in the league, Jay Ratliff, I think this is a really good team, and Chicago knows what they're doing in the free agency department.
I think the defensive tackle positions are going to struggle this year, but I think when you add in Lamar Houston and Jared Allen working together left and right, I think these guys are a 1-2 punch. And, Lamar Houston had 6 sacks last season, 69 tackles. He can tackle that running back, so I don't think he's just a guy that can just go after the quarterback. And then you have Jared Allen, who had 11.5 sacks a season ago. He's probably not going to get that same production as last season, but I guarantee you he's going to get at least, I believe, 9 to 10 sacks this season in the 2014 campaign.
Yeah, you can throw that number to a lot of the players here on this list. Jared Allen, obviously, what you just mentioned, but also a throw in along with the Lamar Houston. How about a Lance Briggs? Not many people are talking about him. He has become one of the best linebackers in the game, but I guess because of the the team that he plays for, maybe because the defense as a whole is so bad, he doesn't get any credit. But, this is one of the best linebackers in the game right now. And, I just cannot explain how their defense struggled so much. If anybody recalls that game against Philadelphia, the final score was 55-11, and they fell behind way too early. They didn't just fall behind out of the gates. They tripped and stumbled and fell. They hit themselves in the face numerous times in that game and fell behind, losing by 44 points. So overall, Chicago has the players to be good. I just can't explain why they're not. You're talking about double-digit sacks almost for 4, 5, 6 players on this team. Well, how about getting 4, 5, or 6 turnovers forced, or how about 4 or 5 wins on the defensive end?
The defensive end is really just, I believe, has struggled, and it's going to be tough to see what this team could do next season. But Nick, the guy who had the most tackles this season was James Anderson. He had 102 tackles this season and 4 sacks. Not too bad for this guy. And they also had a Major Wright who had 100 tackles. But Chris Conte, a guy that's that safety position, and his job is in jeopardy right now. But he had 90 tackles last season. Not too bad with 3 interceptions. But Nick, I'm questioning what this team is going to be doing in the defensive end. I still think they're going to struggle in defense, but I think they did a little bit better. But when you lose a James Anderson in free agency to the New England Patriots, I think that's going to hurt them a lot. But let's see what happens. Let's see how the Bears recover from losing a James Anderson.
I think a guy that can step up is a DJ Williams, though. A guy who's really good, former Denver Bronco, who can step in and play very well in run support. He is an extremely tough middle linebacker, and listen, you're not going to get the same production. James Anderson should be very good, but a guy that I think should step in and play admirably there for Chicago is a DJ Williams. But just a lot of questions, and in my mind, a defense that will remain one of the worst in the division. But then again, when you throw in, I think, a really good defensive front, I think this team has a chance. They have players on the field that can help with a number 30th overall defense. I think you're not going to get second in the league again on the offensive end, but I don't think you're going to get third to last on the defensive side either. Maybe a little more balanced here, and I think you can depend on that defense. One other guy that I do want to mention is Willie Young, the defensive end who comes over from the Detroit Lions. Guys that on the defensive side can step up. Well, James Anderson isn't there, but there are 2 to 3 other players that can make plays there for Chicago.
I think Willie Young will bring some good presence on that D-line, but Nick, you already have 2 solid defensive ends. I'm not really concerned about that. But let's talk about Ryan frickin' Mundy coming from the New York Giants. Nick, I think that's a good pickup And a lot of people I think this is going to be the under the radar type of player that a lot of people aren't going to expect to have a big year. But I think that safety position is looking pretty strong. That free safety position, man, they got some good competition. You have a Brock Vereen that you got in the draft. You have a Chris Conte who had 89 tackles for 3 interceptions, and then you also had an MD Jennings. MD Jennings, man, this safety position, it's just going to be fun to watch. MD Jennings had 74 tackles, 1 sack, and he had a fumble recovery for a touchdown last season. Yes, he had no interceptions, but man, this free safety position, watch the competition. It's gonna be very fun to watch during the preseason.
Yeah, they finally have a squad back there deep. Also throwing Chris Conte at the free safety position, and Brock Vereen, who was one of the draft picks by the Chicago Bears. And you have a very good defensive backfield because these guys, I mean, you mentioned the competition. It's going to be competitive because of the plays that will be available with Tim Jennings and Charles Tillman as the cornerbacks. I mean, when you look at just how many times that these guys are making plays, I mean, Charles Tillman forced, I believe, something like 5 or 6 forced fumbles last year and was among the top in the league overall at interceptions. I mean, when you read this guy's stat line over his career, it is absolutely ridiculous. That's Tim Jennings, who had 13 pass deflections and 4 interceptions and 3 forced fumbles as well. When you go down to Charles Tillman, he has 3 interceptions and another 3 forced fumbles. Maybe not 5, but the point is, this is a team that can force a lot of turnovers, but I guess just continues to allow points in the red zone, and the yardage totals are out of control. But that safety unit, because of the competition, it'll bring out the best of the guys, and I think that will stop some of the huge plays they've given up over the season.
And Nick, they also did a little something else in the draft. They did first round pick they got, and they got the 14th pick overall was a Kyle Fuller. I believe that he'll bring some presence. But Nick, their 2014 draft, Bleacher Report gave them a B+. Not too bad. By drafting Kyle Fuller and Brock Vereen, the team instantly got better in the secondary, Nick. I think that's what's going to boost them up. And yes, yes, some people think rookies won't do very well, but I still, one guy I got to mention out here, let's give him credit. John Bostic didn't have a great first year, didn't have a great rookie year, but I don't think he was too bad. In 16 games, he had 56 tackles, 1 sack, and 1 interception. Not too bad for a rookie coming into his second year being a sophomore.
Yeah, this is a guy that can step up and actually start to play some games for Chicago. This isn't going to be an all-pro superstar player, but mention John Bostic among some of the good players that are in the NFL right now, and he would be right up with the class. I mean, when you take a look at that linebacking core, he's a guy that can rotate and play alongside a Shea McClellan, who I think isn't as good as the other players that are playing for the Bears, but I think Bostic and McClellan make a fresh 1-2 combination that will play very well for Chicago. Take a look at that linebacking core to take a step up because Bostic can finally come into the fold now in his sophomore season.
Nick, I think we could go. I think if we go deeper in this draft class, you can kind of say that if I had to say my best pick out of this draft, what I would have to say is a Will Sutton. Not too bad of a guy. Soon likely dropped down many draft boards because concerns over his weight. And in his 2013 campaign, he registered 48 tackles, 13.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, and 3 pass deflections. Compared to the 63 tackles, 23.5 tackles for loss, 13 sacks, and 5 pass deflections, and 3 forced fumbles he finished with in 2012. That has a lot of stats, people, but I think he can excel, and I think this is a guy that he deserves an A in the draft, but he actually weighed 303 pounds in the NFL Combine in February. That was interesting to me, but then he actually got gained some weight, but a lot of people said they would like him at 285 and 295 this season, and that's his goal. But I think a lot of people are going to say he's a project, and a lot of people are saying this could be a long-term project, but I don't think it will be. I think Wilson will fit just fine with the Chicago Bears.
Chicago actually drafted 2 projects. This should be a very interesting defensive line in the coming years. Him alongside Will Sutton alongside an Ego Ferguson, who they took in the second round from LSU. He's a guy that I guess could eventually replace a Jay Ratliff, who's the penciled-in starter right now. He's athletic, but he's raw and is an extremely developmental type of a player. And I guess he's another guy that needs to focus on his diet. I mean, this is a guy that checks in at over 300 pounds, 315 as a matter of fact. So this is a defensive line filled with projects, but I think because they don't need him right away, Robert, I think this is a defensive front that can eventually become very good. They have 4 or 5 starters already who could be very good and provide great days in the office there for Chicago. We're talking Lamar Houston, Jared Allen, Jay Ratliff at the defensive tackle. They have some players that they can sit behind and learn, and they don't have to be thrown into the fire quite yet.
And Nick, is Ego Ferguson? I just want to ask your opinion on this. Do you think he's going to be a potential bust in the next coming years?
I think Will Sutton should be. I think he was the little more safer pick. Ferguson drafted based almost solely off of potential. But when you take a look at what exactly these guys bring to the table, it's basically they come from programs who are actually very good on the defensive end. They had a lot of starters in the NFL. LSU did. I know Ego Ferguson basically was one of the cognates of that defensive line being so great. I think the bust potential is relatively low, but then again, it depends on how that coaching staff does. They didn't exactly bring together all that good of an offense. So Mel Tucker, the defensive coordinator, has some big time work to do. I'm not comfortable with the defensive scheme he is. I don't think he'll be a bust, but I think Ego Ferguson and Will Sutton, we won't see them very successful in years 1 and maybe even 2 or 3.
I think Will Sutton needs to just progress a little bit more, but Nick, I don't like how the Bears kind of get some project type of players. It's something that's been consistent in their drafts recently, but I mean, it's going to be tough, but I think one guy I want to point out from this draft that comes from Arizona is a Kareem Carey. I think he's going to learn a lot from a Matt Forte and potentially become the second string running back on that squad.
Yeah, I think the Bears had a pretty solid draft when you talk about addressing all the needs. Matt Forte is getting up there in age. They take a Kadeem Carey, who many believe to be a very solid running back. I think they took him in, the 4th or 5th round. And then they also addressed offensive line because they're getting a little old, especially with the Jordan Mills and Kyle Long. Long is actually relatively young in the league. But also, that safety unit was a little bit cause for concern. Brock Vereen should be able to fill in there. But before, Robert, you reach your point here, I just wanted to throw one thing out because we were talking about it, and I do want to mention it. If the Bears do anything poorly, it is a draft defensive players. There are very few guys among this list, especially in the first round, who end up being great players for them. I'm just going to go back to their draft history, 2008 and up, and there are almost 0 starters that Chicago has drafted, and especially in the early goings. They took in 2008 a project in Marcus Harrison, a defensive tackle. He obviously didn't work out, and they took a Zachary Bowman at defensive back. He didn't work either. Move up to 2009. They took a Jaron Gilbert with their first pick. He didn't work. Henry Melton has provided some very good stability at defensive tackle, but then the rest of their draft was not too successful as well. Their picks in 2011 were Gabe Karimi, that's offensive line. Defensive side, Corey Wooten, obviously not all that good of a player now with the Bears. He's still a starting for them. And obviously, we'll go up to 2012 with Brandon Harden. They took him with one of the first picks. I mean, I can keep going, but the point is the Bears, they have missed more than made as far as early round projections for draft picks.
Nick, there's a lot of other guys too. I actually been kind of looking this up, and Nick, a lot of these guys are kind of just big busts. You ever heard of David Terrell? He was a wide receiver that was supposed to be actually pretty good and didn't really help out. And Michael
Green,
Michael Haynes.
What'd you say?
Michael Haynes, the defensive end.
Yeah.
Didn't really plan out. And then K. McNown, a quarterback in 1999. Didn't really plan out there for Chicago. But there's a lot of interesting. Wow, this is really interesting. They have had a lot of big busts.
Yeah.
Over the last couple of years.
I will give them credit. 2012, they hit right on the money with the Shea McClellan, who's starting for them. But that's the only defensive starter that they've drafted over the last 3 years. Every other player is no longer in the league or starting for them on the offensive end. They do better on the offensive side, but defensively, just not that good at all.
Their defense is kind of just really... I don't think their defense will struggle as much, but still I think their secondary did get injured, Nick, and that's a cause of concern there. When you have to rely on your rookie Kyle Fuller, I think, to come in and really step up. Because when you look at it, Charles Tillman got hurt last season, didn't really play a lot. I think that's what hurt the Bears in some of their games, and probably cost them some, but also the one guy who stayed healthy, and I believe he's getting up there in age, but Tim Jennings, 4 interceptions, and he's still looking pretty damn good. I got nothing against Tim Jennings because this guy can stay healthy. He was pretty much the only corner for them last season.
He really was. I mean, when you take a look defensively, I think the problem is almost all of their starting defensive players have come via free agency. I don't think you can win on a consistent basis on the defensive side when you have over half of your starters flushed in and out every year. I mean, they're penciled in right now. There are actually 6 starters on the defensive side haven't played a down for them last season. Jared Allen, Jay Ratliff, Lamar Houston, throw in DJ Williams, Ryan Mundy, and then Chris Conti. But he's the guy that that's the rookie that should step up. But either way, 5 to 6 defensive players who haven't played for them last year consistently will be starting for them. It's a completely revamped Chicago defense, but that doesn't mean it's going to be eons in front of last year because, listen, it takes a long time to get accustomed to that many new players. Just ask the Baltimore Ravens, who had 11 starters in their Super Bowl run, no longer with them last year, and you saw what happened as a team to Baltimore after the championship.
The defense, it's just, I think what the Bears do is they kind of get too much some of those aged players, but, Lamar Houston's he's not that old yet, which is kind of a good thing, but they did get an old player like a Jared Allen. Yes, he had 11.5 sacks last season, but you're not going to expect him to do that again. And Ratliff, I don't think he's going to be a bad player. I think that helps the tackle position, but the one thing I'm going to probably see struggle, I think, is the linebacking core a little bit. I think Julius Peppers really took a toll for this squad, and really just losing him it's going to hurt them, but I think they really did well on the safety position. I think the safety position is going to be one of their strong points. But Nick, let's go to the part of the show where we've been waiting for, and I know you really just want to talk. We just really want to get down to it. The quarterback position, Jay Cutler got injured during the 2013 campaign. Only played 11 games, but he still threw over 2,500 yards in passing, threw 19 touchdowns for 12 interceptions, and got sacked 19 times. I don't think this is a bad quarterback. I'm going to give him a B+, because when you have an Ashawn Jeffrey and a Brandon Marshall to rely on, you're looking pretty solid. And also I think this isn't you don't have a bad tight end position as well, and you rely on a Matt Forte.
Yeah, Josh McCown actually had a better QBR than Jay Cutler, ironically enough, during the time that he subbed in for the injured Cutler. I mean, you do have to admit 12 interceptions, relatively steep for a guy that was actually, when McCown came in, threw 13 touchdowns to only one pick. It was very interesting to see how Cutler didn't exactly play all too well. A B plus may even be a little bit generous, but then when you take a look at what exactly that offensive line looks like, it may be right around a good spot for him.
His O-line isn't that bad. I mean, their right side, yes, it's going to be second-year players, but I'm kind of glad this team is they're going in the right direction with the offense. That's something I'm really interested in looking for years to come, but I think this offense is good, is pretty much at its high point. And they pretty much have to. I think they gotta make it run in the next 2 years, or they're done. But that defense needs to get their ways. Needs to find a strong. They need to find the light there. The defense needs to find the light. That's what I'm gonna say. But running back position, Nick, I don't. This grade is. I think this is actually a pretty strong running back core. But when you have a Matt Forte who ran over 2,500 yards a year ago, and then you also have Michael Ford and a Kadeem Carey out of U of A. I think Kadeem Carey could actually be a solid second string running back, but Nick, Matt Forte is going to be leading that charge. I'm going to give that running back position a B plus.
Yeah, Matt Forte is a very serviceable B-plus caliber player, which is exactly what I'm going to give him. But they had Michael Bush as their backup running back last year. It'll be interesting to see what Ford and Kadeem Carey bring to the table. But look for this team to find the end zone on the ground a lot this year. Also throw in this. By a running back for the Bears, only 2 fumbles the entire season, which is towards the top of the league. So obviously a team that not only can run with authority, 4.6 yards a carry, but can also hang on to the football with regularity. Only 2 fumbles. That is fantastic. I mean, off of over 350 touches by Bears running backs, that's awesome.
I mean, I still have my concerns for Kadeem Carey, Nick, but 2 fumbles, damn, that's actually pretty damn impressive. But remember, you're dealing with a rookie here, but Matt Forte, as long as he learns from Matt Forte, I think Kadeem Carey will be just fine. Let's move on to that fullback position. Tony Fiametta, he played all 16 games last season. I'll give him a B.
Same here. That is so ironic. Tony Fiametta should be a very good run blocking fullback. He's not a guy that you'll be relying much in the receiving game, but you don't have to. I mean, Chicago has enough weapons as it is.
And we can name those weapons just right now. You have a Brandon Marshall. He had 100 receptions a year ago, and his receiving yards were 1,295. And, man, the big red zone target for the Bears was a Brandon Marshall. 12 touchdowns last season. He is a red zone threat. But when you have an Ashawn Jeffrey who had 89 receptions, 1,421 yards, and had 7 touchdowns, not too bad. And you also gotta get another player. You gotta get your free agent acquisition. Josh Morgan came from the Washington Redskins and a former 49er. Gotta point that out there. Had 20 receptions for 214 yards. Yes, he didn't do a lot for the Redskins, but still that brings depth to the wide receiver core. I think Josh Morgan is gonna help out. I'm going to give him, this is actually, Nick, when they were actually rating the duos, the Bears actually have one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL. So I'm going to give it a B plus too.
A B plus? Actually, we've covered teams like the Falcons with Roddy White and Julio Jones, the Green Bay Packers with Cobb and Jordy Nelson. But, I mean, also make sure to tune in later on tonight, Robert. We have the Detroit Lions, who have a pretty good receiving core as well, and we'll wrap up the NFC North tonight. But overall, I think this is the best receiving core we've covered, and we've done 15 NFL teams. I give this unit an A. I mean, when you throw in a combined with Jeffrey and Marshall, 19 receiving touchdowns, and then you add a Josh Morgan, who has speed for days. When he's even, he's leaving. So you look at that team, and also, do they still have Earl Bennett? No, they don't, which was somewhat of a loss. But then you throw in an Eric Weems, who also could be a really good special teams player for you. And overall, I think Chicago gets an A, which is the best grade I've given a wide receiver core this year. I may be a little too high on them right now, but I think this is a really good unit, up and coming superstar potential.
Nick, I think we gotta have a good debate here, because I think when you lose an Earl Bennett, it can hurt this team a little bit. I mean, yes, they have a Josh Morgan. Nick, I'm not gonna bash on him, but he's a veteran type of guy, and I mean, I got my question marks on vets for wide receivers. I mean, yes, I guess you could say they're gonna be okay. To be honest, they don't have anyone else. To be honest with you, Nick, that's something that you gotta get through your head there. I mean, they got Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey. Yes, they have probably one of the best wide receiver duos. You give those two an A, but the rest of the core, I got a question of B minus. That's what I gotta say to that, because they're spending all their money on those two guys.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying a B plus, because of the core. I'm not saying because of the duo. The duo, I gotta give them an A. Those two guys are freaking amazing, and they know how to work together. But I'm just saying, Nick, the rest of that wide receiver core, remember what? Tom Morgan didn't even get a touchdown last season. He only had 20 receptions. He didn't have like 50 or 60 like an Earl Bennett did. So Nick, it's not they haven't replaced an Earl Bennett yet. That was kind of my concern in the free agency, and I'm gonna give him a B plus, because I don't think the core is there yet. I don't think they have that. Josh Morgan is gonna be a good he's gonna be an okay third string wide receiver, but I mean, besides that, they got no one else.
Yeah, these are some huge receivers that they have. I mean, if you look at an NBA All-Star team, you could throw in these players in the mix. Both of them are 6'5", over 200 pounds. Actually, Jeffrey's only 6'3", but he looks like he's 6'5", 216 pounds. Obviously, it's a 1-2 punch, and Earl Bennett will be missed as the number 3 target. He's a significant contributor, but... and also, one thing I do want to add to support your point, while there is 189 catches between the top 2 receivers, they've been targeted over 250 times. So that's a success rate of about 70%, which is not exactly what I would bargain for if I'm looking for an A type of a receiving core. I may give this receiving core, and actually, you know what, I think I'm going to do it, about an A minus. But still, this is one of the best receiving cores in the league. We're picking apples and oranges here because, listen, Chicago on the receiving core, on the wide receiver position, is really good. And watch out for this team to be really great on the offensive end again.
They're pretty solid. But, Nick, I'm glad I kind of changed your mind on that. You're a little too high on these guys. I don't know what you've been doing lately, but, I mean, I think I like the duo.
They're an A.
The top 2 is an A, but the rest of the core is gonna struggle. The rest of the core, I think if they kept Earl Bennett, that would have been solid. I would have gave that core an A right there, because those 3 guys just made the difference for me. But I think Josh Morgan doesn't bring that right type of presence just yet. If Josh Morgan gets 50 receptions, I'll be happy. It could be an A caliber then. But right now, I don't see I think Josh Morgan is just going to be the guy to look for when Marshall and Jeffrey are covered. But let's go to that tight end position. Let's go to Martellus Bennett, who has been a pretty solid player. I mean, 65 receptions, 759 yards, 5 touchdowns this season. And then you also have a Matthew Mulligan, who he had two receptions for 16 yards and 1 touchdown. Nick, I'm going to give this core a... It's not really... It's not one... I don't want to say... I don't want to be... They don't really have that 1-2 punch in that tight end position. I think I'm going to give the tight end position a B.
About a B minus for me. Overall, I think this is a unit that isn't half bad, Martellus Bennett has really resurrected his career. He was looking like a bust for the Dallas Cowboys, but he has really gotten his act together. He was a project and took him about 5 or 6 years to really make a name for himself. But also, according to ESPN, he actually was a relatively unreliable receiver, as off of nearly 100 targets, he only had 65 catches. I mean, I'm just taking a look at this, and I'm actually relatively surprised that Cutler, part of the problem may be the quarterback position, but the only reliable target, the guy who has over 80% completion rate, is Earl Bennett. That is very interesting. Every other target, other than obviously guys who only had like 4, 2, 1 catches, basically backup players, of the starters that I'm mentioning, the only guy that was reliable was Earl Bennett. But one of the next best players was Martellus Bennett, a guy who should be very good for Chicago. He's been a security blanket over the last few years for Jay Cutler.
Okay, Nick, so I'm going to give you the stats here for the targeting. Alshon Jeffrey was targeted 159 times, had 89 receptions. Brandon Marshall targeted 163 times, had 100 receptions. Martellus Bennett was targeted 96 times, 65 receptions. Matt Forte targeted 94 times, 74 receptions. And Earl Bennett was targeted 44 times for 32 receptions. Alshon Jeffrey was targeted a lot, and he caught 89 of them. Not too bad. I think Alshon Jeffrey, he's still got to work on maybe catching some more balls, but it could be Jay Cutler's fault a little bit. I mean, that O-line, still, he was sacked 19 times out of 11 games. Let's remember that. He still got pressured a little bit. And I think that was maybe the struggle for Jay Cutler. And that O-line, it's developing. It's still in that process mode. They're going to have second-year players now on that right side that people are really going to get to know for. But, out of that targeting, I think it's maybe just because under pressure or something like that.
Yeah, but it's not an accurate indicator. But I mean, when you mention Alshon Jeffrey has only received 59% of his targets, I mean, that's maybe a cause for concern. There are a lot of passes, though, that he had to make acrobatic receptions for, and he averages 16 yards a catch. That is amazing for this receiving core. But we also were talking about the tight end, who isn't half bad either. 11.7 yards a catch. The only problem is, I don't know what you're getting out of a Dante Rosario, who is tossed around from team to team over the last few years, and also the penciled-in backup, which is Zach Miller, not the Seattle Seahawks Zach Miller, but another Zach Miller. I mean, that just shows the kind of struggles that they have to bring in talent. And also Matthew Mulligan, who's more of a run-blocking type of a player.
I want to see what this tight end position can do, but Mulligan, I think, is going to have to step up this year. But let's move on to that O-line. Jermon Bushrod. You also have a Matt Falson. Also at the center position, you have a Roberto Garza. You have a Kyle Long out of U of O and Jordan Mills. And Jordan Mills and Kyle Long on that right side are going to become second-year players. And then you also have a Roberto Garza from Texas A&M. But Nick, I gotta say, this O-line, they weren't this. I think the O-line is gonna be better this year. I think because Long and Mills are now really experienced one season of football. I think that O-line might be a bit better. I think they were at. I'd say last season they got a C+. I think I'm gonna move it up to a B-.
I'm gonna put them at a B because I love the kind of depth that they have. They have a Brian De La Puente, one of the better Saints players. He comes over and he's actually penciled in backup right now, but should be able to sub in against Matt Slauson, former Jet, at the left guard position. And also, some of the draft picks include a Cody Booth and a Charles Leno, who should be very good rotational players for them. Overall, Chicago looks to be relatively good here on the offensive line position, but not great. You can't depend too much on Chicago's free agent acquisition, Jermon Bushrod. He played okay for the Bears and should be just an average type of a player. Also a Jordan Mills. Question on him. The tackles aren't great, but I guess they're good enough for about a B grade there for the Bears.
Nick, the O-line is gonna. I think they're gonna struggle a little bit this season, but let's still remember 19 sacks on Jay Cutler, 11 on Josh McCown. I think they could do a little bit better. And remember, Jay Cutler only played. He only played. What was it? Oh, he only played 11 games this season. So they got sacked 19 times. They gotta tone down the sacks a little bit. 11 games, 19 sacks. That isn't a good stat to have.
Yeah, it isn't too bad, but that's a little over one sack a game. I don't think that's overly bad. And also, that running game was pretty good. I mean, you're talking 4.6 yards a carry for Matt Forte. Always when you have a great running back, the numbers are going to be skewed, but that's along the top 5 in the league. So I think offensively, your line isn't a weakness, I guess, unless the rest of the team is just flat out better than every other team. But that offensive line isn't too bad. I mean, I may be a little high on them as well, but this is the second best offense in the league in points per game, so they must be doing something right.
Well, I guess maybe the coach is doing the right job over there.
Mark Trestman, boy,
Mark
what a player.
Trestman could be doing something over there.
Yeah, what an acquisition he was.
Maybe that's the secret of this offense. But nevertheless, let's move on to the defensive side of the football. You have a Lamar Houston had 69 tackles, 6 sacks, and a fumble recovery a year ago. Then you have a Jeremiah Ratliff, and then beside him is Stephen Paella, and then right defensive end from the Minnesota Vikings comes over to the Chicago Bears, and division rival. 52 tackles and 11.5 sacks for Jared Allen a year ago out of Idaho State. Nick, I gotta say, I think the defensive ends you gotta give them a high grade, because I think when you have Jared Allen and Lamar Houston, I think those are two guys that are really gonna bring strong presence for that D line, and Jeremiah Ratliff will make a big impact as well. But Nick, I mean, this is a hard grade to give. I gotta say, I think this is a good squad, but I still think they're gonna be developing, and they got some big time. They got Wilson, and we also talked about Ego Ferguson. So they got some projects down there in that D line, and those two guys are penciled in as the second string guys right now in that D line. So maybe a little bit concerned for your depth, but I think I'm gonna give them. I think I'm gonna give them a B. I think that feels right for me. I know you're probably gonna be like, why are you giving a B? Why are you giving them a B when you should give them a B plus?
Robert, why are you going to give them a B when you're going to give them a B plus? That is so interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a toss and turn type of a grade. I guess we'll average in the middle there, because I love what Lamar Houston brings to the table. I think he was the free agent acquisition of the Bears this offseason. He comes in off of potentially being the best Raider defensive player there on the football team. A guy that can suit up and play right away. And also, this would be, I guess, an A minus, but listen, guys, Jared Allen, as good of a player as he is, he's not an all-star, superstar type of a player, because he only does one thing well. He only sacks the quarterback. He's not a run-stuffing defensive end. He's not a guy that can rough it up down on the goal line, which is why you have to depend on a Willie Young, the backup, for run support. I thought that was a very good acquisition, because you know what Allen brings to the table. It's only one dimension. Young brings the other dimension, and that's why I give him a B+.
B plus isn't too bad. I give them a B. I think they're going to be consistent. I think they're going to I think they're not going to be a bad O-line, but let's move on to that linebacking core. Let's move on to the strong side linebacker. We have Shea McClellan, who had 30 tackles for 4 sacks and a fumble recovery. And then your penciled-in middle linebacker is John Bostic, a second-year player out of Florida, had 56 tackles and 1 sack and an interception, a fumble recovery. Then you have Lance Briggs, who had 71 tackles and 3 sacks. Man, relying on John Bostic in his second year, I think John Bostic might bring something to the table his second year. I think he could progress over time. A guy I like to talk about, because I think John Bostic could be, well, as long as they don't go in free agency, be like, oh, let's go get a big middle linebacker. But I think they're going to stick with John Bostic for the next couple of years. I think it's going to be interesting what Bostic can bring. If he doesn't progress, though, I'm a little concerned for Chicago if they're going to either go in the draft and get another middle linebacker, or they're going to go in free agency. But I got to say a C. I think this team needs some work in the linebacking position. I think this is a squad that could really work on it. And the only reason I say that is it's just the numbers don't come out right. Like Lance Briggs, he's a good player and all. I'm not gonna bash on him. He's probably the linebacker that's kind of been the most consistent with his numbers. But I mean, the strong side of middle linebacking position needs work.
Yeah, I would have to at least somewhat agree with you because this linebacking core, I mean, based off of how good the defensive line is, just haven't made a whole lot of plays. I mean, you're talking about a DJ Williams who was on there last year, a guy who's expected to be one of the better linebackers on the team. Well, how about only getting a combined, that's 27 tackles. Now, he may have missed some games and only 2 sacks as well. This is a unit that, I mean, has its struggles, sure, but then when you throw in the fact that you have a rookie linebacker who wasn't even all that good, and John Bostic, now he's developing, but he was one of the best tacklers of your linebacking core. I mean, this is a unit that has struggled. A B- for me.
B- is not bad of a grade. I give it a C. That's actually, this whole defense could either do really well or struggle a little bit. Let's move on to the cornerback position. Tim Jennings pretty much led that whole cornerback position with 4 interceptions a year ago and actually had 2 touchdowns for that defense. And then you go to a Charles Tillman who only played 8 games and actually had 3 interceptions. Nick, I think Charles Tillman, if he stays healthy, would be key for the Chicago Bears. And then you bring in your first-round pick of 2014, Kyle Fuller. And Nick, you said a lot of first-round busts. Can Kyle Fuller become a bust? But they also got Vereen in that draft as well. And I think Kyle Fuller won't be a bad guy. I think he's actually going to get a lot of time for that defense. I mean, if Charles Tillman stays healthy and Tim Jennings stay healthy, Nick, I think this is a solid cornerback position. Yes, you can argue Tim Jennings is getting up there in age. He's still going to play, and he's still playing like he's like 20, 27, 28. That's not bad at all for a 30, what is he, like 31, 32? Something like that. I know he's a pretty old guy, but Nick, I gotta give this unit, I think I'm gonna give him a B.
Yeah, same here, about a B. A guy who basically can help Kyle Fuller develop is Walter Payton Man of the Year of 2013, Charles Tillman, who I absolutely love. I mean, this is an overachieving cornerback crew, don't get me wrong. These are guys that shouldn't even be in the league. Undersized, not enough speed, not enough strength, but still play very well. Obviously, Kelvin Hayden coming over from Atlanta and Indianapolis should provide some great 1-2-3 combinations there in the cornerback crew. And Kyle Fuller, I mean, you mentioned maybe he's not exactly your guy in the cornerback position, but his return ability is top-notch, and his speed should be able to translate immediately to the cornerback position. A B is a good grade.
I think speed's going to help them out, too. I think just because of Tim Jennings and Charles Tillman aren't the fastest guys. But the thing is, they can get interceptions, so I'm not really worried about that. I think Kyle Fuller, I think he's going to contend with some of the top wide receivers, but I think that he's still it's your rookie season, and it's kind of a toss-up. Are you going to stay in the middle? Are you going to do really well? Or are you going to just fall and be one of the worst players in this league? But are you ready for the next level? But let's move on here. We got the free safety position, where I believe that's going to be some good competition. You have Brock Marine, Chris Conte, and MD Jennings. Nick, I think that free safety position is looking pretty stacked right now. And then you also have a Ryan Mundy who actually stayed healthy throughout the whole season. I have no concerns with that. To be honest, I don't really have any concern with the depth on the free safety and strong safety position at all. Nick, I think this is the highest grade I'm going to give for this defense. I'm going to give them a B+.
Yeah, I'm actually going to at least somewhat disagree with you. I listen, man. I'm going to give them a B-, which isn't all that bad of a grade. But I'm telling you, all of these guys, great depth, but I think they're all just kind of average. I mean, better than last year, but just kind of average. I mean, I believe I'm the kind of guy where if you have 4 safeties on your team that are vying for a starting spot, you have no starting safeties. I mean, because other than maybe what the Bears have with the 1-2 punch at receiver, I mean, it's very rare that you have a lot of safeties that are really good. And I mean, these names are solid players, but I don't think any of them really jump out at me, and that's the difference. But overall, if you base our grades off of what the offense is bringing you, a B plus, and what the defense is bringing you, a B. Overall, this is a team that's above average, and Chicago with Mark Trestman should be able to, I guess, overachieve again, especially on the defensive side with the turnovers being as in favor as it was for them last year.
I think Mark Trestman is the guy. I think he's the guy that everyone's going to be. I think he's kind of the under the radar head coach that a lot of guys are saying, oh, this guy's probably helping out Jay Cutler. I think he really gets that offense going. I think that's how the offense is so good, but I think it's going to be really interesting to watch for. Nick, let's go on to special teams. Pat O'Donnell is going to be he's your holder. Your kick returner is a Michael Ford. Punt returner is Eric Weems. Your long snapper is Brandon Hartson, and your kicker is Robbie Gould. He went 26 for 29 last season. His longest was 58. So Nick, this special teams unit, give him a B minus.
Yeah, I'm going to give the special teams about a B because I love what Eric Weems brings to the table. He's a very under-the-radar caliber kickoff return man who I believe had at least one, if not more, kickoff return touchdowns last year. It's hard to return a kickoff for a score. You got to be top 10 in the league in order to do that, especially now that they back it up to the 35-yard line. I mean, it's nearly impossible. Just to ask Devin Hester, who spent the last couple of years now no longer with the Bears, but with the Falcons. I guess Weems and Hester switched teams, and they should be very good as a rejuvenized player in a new team. But listen, they're also their punter, Pat O'Donnell, not one of the best, and Robbie Gould, who's their kicker, just kind of average, a B for me.
Yeah, I said a B minus. I don't think this is a great special teams unit, but I think they're going to contend. And Nick, we gotta say who's going to be the best player for the Bears in 2014.
The best player, Alshon Jeffrey, no question about it. I think he can develop now in his 3rd year and even provide more production there for Jay Cutler. No Earl Bennett, who needs to step up? That's the 6'3", 215-pound superstar. Alshon Jeffrey he should have been taken first overall. He was taken early on in the 2nd round a few years ago.
Nick, I think I got to go with Brandon Marshall, my man, who actually got 100 receptions a year ago, and I think he's going to keep on getting better and better. He's a guy that brings speed, and he just got a big, giant contract. And Nick, I like Brandon Marshall. He has a great attitude towards the game, has great moral, and really I connects with Jay Cutler. I think that's what makes him such a great player.
Definitely a guy that has brought it to the Bears since he got there, but the big deal may be kind of like a career achievement award. It's not I don't think this guy is going to continue to produce because he's getting a little long in the tooth. I believe Brandon Marshall is reaching the age of 30 years old, and that seems to be a death sentence for a lot of receivers and running backs who take a pounding. Maybe not receivers as much, but definitely a player who, with the size, can still produce, but he's 30 years old, and I don't know if he's going to be the best player. Still one of the best in the league, though. He led the team in receiving last year.
Are you going to say about Frank Gore, man? Is that where we're getting out to here, man?
Might as well just throw it out there. Frank Gore, similar story.
Hey, Frank Gore's still producing, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got over 1,000 yards rushing. He was 30. Didn't
Adrian Peterson get double that one year?
You know what? Hey, that's another good point too. People over 30 still produce. So you know what? Maybe your point's gonna backfire on you. I think that's what's gonna happen. But best free agent acquisition for the Bears.
the best free agent was Lamar Houston. Hands down, will be probably the best defensive lineman that was taken via free agency during the 2013 season.
You know what, Nick? You took my pick. You stole it. Because Lamar Houston, watching him in Oakland, probably the only thing I actually wanted to watch for the Oakland Raiders. Lamar Houston, a guy that I believe should have gone to a playoff team. I think because he got such a good contract in Chicago. I think that's why I wanted to go there. But, you know, I'm happy for Lamar Houston. I'm glad he got away from Oakland because Oakland's not going anywhere.
I mean, there's where careers go to die. But,
yes, exactly.
But Houston will be stealing away sacks, too, from both of us. I mean, this is a man who could have a career year here with a new team. I mean, there are players that outbreak in their first year with a new ball club. Expect Jared Allen to do that somewhat here with the Chicago Bears. But Lamar Houston, potentially the best free agent acquisition there in the division as well.
Under the radar.
Under the radar, a guy who many people actually have overlooked over the last few years, and I mean, I guess we did on the show as well. DJ Williams, the linebacker from the Broncos, should be able to come in and provide some huge plays. He's not going to be the superstar, but he, true to form, under the radar acquisition, a guy that should provide some huge plays there in certain spurts there for the Bears.
You know, I think my under-the-radar player, I kind of gave you a hint there, I think.
Ryan Mundy?
Yes,
right.
You got it right. Damn, that's you're a good listener. Yeah, Ryan Mundy, I think, is going to be my under-the-radar type of guy. I think he's going to have a better season, and I think with the Chicago Bears, I think that secondary, I think he has a secured spot already. I think he's already going to be the secured starter on this team. So that's what I'm going to like. I think he's going to have a couple more interceptions. And I really like his physical presence. I think he can hit hard and could really break up some of those passes. So let's see what Ryan Mundy can do here. But Nick, I gotta say, I think the Bears. I mean, so far, what have we given the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers so far?
Well, actually, for those of you who have joined us on Team Breakdowns, this is a series that has gone 15 shows strong, and number 16 will air later on tonight. But obviously, thank you all for joining us here on Spreaker. But overall, the teams that the Bears are in the division with, all of which could be right around 500. Now, we've taken a team-by-team breakdown, starting with the other great teams in the NFC North. The Minnesota Vikings, we predicted to be around 5-11 or 6-10, but a very good team that we expected to be among the best in the coming years. Similar story with what we can think the Detroit Lions might be. We'll take a look at them later on tonight. But the potential NFC North winners are the Green Bay Packers, who Robert had at 11-5 and I had at 10-6. So when you take a look at Chicago and their schedule, it's relatively hard at the beginning. You take on the Niners in San Francisco, the Packers, the Panthers in back-to-back weeks, and then the Patriots in Gillette Stadium before the bye. Then following a Week 10 contest against the Packers, it gets relatively easy, along with 5 of your last 7 games are at home, and you play teams like the Cowboys and the Buccaneers, throwing the Lions in there. And I think if the Bears can get off to a solid start, they can put the Packers in a run for their money for the NFC North title, the inaugural, potentially the toughest upcoming division in the NFL this season.
Well, Nick, you actually got at San Francisco. You play Green Bay at home. Well, you play Green Bay twice. Then you gotta play New England. I think some tough teams. You gotta play at Carolina. Detroit and Minnesota, it could be a split, but it's gonna be interesting to watch for. But Nick, let's cue the music here, as it's gonna be interesting. This is what our favorite part of the show we like to do is the Chicago Bears schedule, and we predict game by game. Nick, let's go to Week 1 facing Buffalo at home. Nick, I think they get the easy win here. I think Chicago is going to overpower the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, to say it's a mismatch would be a drastic understatement. Huge win to start the season. If the Bills make it a game, if they even keep it close, that'd be a huge surprise.
And they lost someone big on that defense. We'll be covering that in the next, in whenever NFL team breakdown, we break down the Buffalo Bills. But week 2 at San Francisco, Nick, that's going to be a tough game when you're at San Francisco, and that's a pretty tough defense to handle. Nick, I think San Francisco gets the win.
Actually, the upset of the season. Tune in, ladies and gentlemen, for the Week 2 contest in Levi Stadium. The inaugural first game there for San Francisco at home. I think the Bears pull off a huge win, and they upset the San Francisco 49ers to start 2-0 in the division to lead it to the NFC North.
Nick doesn't really like the 49ers on this show at all, so he's kind of been really mean. But nevertheless, let's move on to Week 3. Nick, what did we say at New York?
I thought that the Jets would defeat the Bears. Meanwhile, Chicago, you thought, would overtake the Jets in the new Meadowlands Stadium.
So I said they go 2-1 right now, and let's move on to Week 4 versus Green Bay at home. And Nick, what was that?
Yeah, in Week 4, both of us thought that the Bears would lose to the Packers, which is crucial because that would probably put Green Bay ahead of the division by that point. Actually, we could take a look in a minute. But then in Week 5, we think Chicago loses back-to-back games. They fall short against the Panthers on the road as well. Then in week number 6, we predicted the game at the Falcons. I gave the Bears the win. Meanwhile, Robert, they thought they would lose in Atlanta.
All right, Nick, let's move on to Week 7 versus Miami. I think this is actually going to be a win for the Chicago Bears. I think they actually get a big win at home versus Miami.
I think so too. It's just too big of a mismatch for the Dolphins. And Miami, boy, that offense, that defense, is there any way that they can contest with Chicago? Probably not.
All right, let's move on to Week 8 at New England. Nick, that's going to be a tough game for the Bears. I think the Patriots are potentially going to the Super Bowl. I know you and me agree with it right before this show. Yes, everyone, we believe the Patriots are going to go to the Super Bowl. I think the Patriots get the win here.
Yeah, same here. And that's going to be basically a real crucial game for them. But, I mean, following a road trip, they got to go back to Gillette. Too much for Chicago. A loss before the bye.
All right, Nick, we got a Week 9 bye, and then we go to Week 10. It's going to be Sunday Night Football at Green Bay. Nick, what do we predict for that one?
That's going to be a huge NFC North matchup. Boy, can you wait for the NFL season to start? Sunday Night Football, Bears at Packers. We both thought the Bears would lose well in Green Bay. Then in week number 11, it's home to take on the Vikings, one of 5 of the next 6 that are at Soldier Field. And I think that the Bears lose to the Vikings, while Robert predicts that they win. Then in week number 12, another home game. It's against the Buccaneers. I think that the Bears defeat the Bucs, while Robert believes that Chicago falls short to Tampa Bay.
All right, Nick, then at week 13, they're going to be at Detroit. Nick, they had Detroit's number last season. I believe they still do. I think they have a better defense, and their offense is still ranked one of the best. They get the win over Detroit.
Yeah, they've had a real rough midpoint of the year. Now they face a relatively easy opponent, I guess you could say. According to that schedule, they get the win.
All right, Nick, let's move on to week 14 versus the Dallas Cowboys. Nick, the Dallas Cowboys are not going to be a good team this year, period. I don't even like Dallas. I don't like, what is this, America's football team? No, it's not, because they're going to get the loss.
Yeah, I think that this is the first of 3 straight home games. Chicago trying to vie for a playoff spot. They're going to give Dallas everything that they bargained for and then some. It's going to be a real tough game for Dallas to pull ahead.
All right, Nick, let's move on to week 15. Monday Night Football. Cue the music. Upset for the Chicago Bears. They get the win over the New Orleans Saints. Jay Cutler throws for over 250 yards passing. Matt Forte gets the winning touchdown and wins it for the Chicago Bears. And they get the W.
Huge upset, but I still don't think so. I think that's way too out of control. I give the Bears a loss over New Orleans. I mean, it is a Soldier Field, but the Saints would be looking for the number 1 seed. They get the win.
Then let's move on to week 16 versus Detroit. Nick, I said they have their number, and they're still going to have it. I think they're going to actually sweep the Detroit Lions this season.
Yeah, Robert thinks that they win 4 straight games before week 17. I think they win 2 over the Lions. In week 17, Robert gives the Bears the loss at the Vikings to close out the season, while I give the Bears their 9th win. They defeat the Minnesota Vikings to finish 9-7, while Robert predicts that the Bears also go 9-7. Typical. We both think that they win the same amount of games. But when you take a look at Chicago, that defense is a cause for concern, which is why we gave them losses to great offenses: the Green Bay Packers, the Carolina Panthers, the New England Patriots. And I mean, Robert should have given them a loss against the Saints.
Hey, you know what? Don't judge.
Actually, I kind of like the pick, dude.
I like it.
I kind of think that
it's kind of you for
if
San
Chicago's
Francisco.
going to upset a team, it's a ball club that they match up very well against. I mean, the Saints maybe a little bit better defensively, but still not. I mean, not among the elites. And Chicago can take advantage of that. So
And
I
their
think it may be
secondary is not
interesting.
bad.
9-7 is a solid record for a team that finished 500 a year ago.
I think the reason why they win this game, and stay with me here, the secondary is actually pretty damn solid. And I think they can contend with Drew Brees this season. I think they can get the win. I think Drew Brees is running out of gas there, and they get the win.
Actually, Robert, and listen, I mean, the Saints, towards that point of the year, may exactly be running out of gas. I mean, because they could have the first seed locked up. So that's an interesting point as well. But actually, I counted it wrong. You thought they'd go 8-8, not 9-7. Interesting.
Either way, this team isn't going to be great. I think they're going to be at the midpoint. I think they're going to be about the same record. But either way, I think some of these games are kind of toss-ups for them. And I think they could contend pretty close with the Green Bay Packers, but I think the Packers still got that lock in that division.
Yeah, the team of the NFC North is the Packers. I mean, unless Aaron Rodgers and the entire ship just falls apart like the Titanic, you got yourself an NFC North champion. But take a look for Chicago to really turn some heads, especially early on if they can beat teams like the Niners or the Jets in the early goings on the road, because it gets tough as they're away from Soldier Field, but when the weather gets cold, Chicago returns home, and their games are relatively easy outside of that Saints game, which is why we think they pull off a lot of wins late. Look for Chicago to make a late season push, but in our eyes, too little, too late for the Bears to be champions in the NFC North. But still doesn't mean that they can't win a playoff spot, that wild card position up for grabs.
It's going to be interesting to see what the Bears could do this season. I think it's either going to be they make the playoffs or they go home. It's going to be one of those situations. But Nick, I think week 17 for me is a toss-up at Minnesota. You either get the win or they get the loss. Let's see what happens. But Nick, I think we got to end it here, but we're going to be right back. Anyway, we're going to be covering the Detroit Lions. And then we got to figure out what our next team will be. But
yeah, we'll give it to them. But actually, guys, make sure to tune in. We'll have the NFL team breakdowns, let's say 6:15. But overall, when you take a look at this NFL team breakdown segment, we break down position by position, game by game for every team. We're reaching team number 16. We're halfway done with the NFL season. And listen, guys, in that Detroit Lions team breakdown, make sure to tune in, because we'll start to give you playoff picture caliber, or we're starting to give you actual division leaders and A, B, and C. So make sure to stay tuned. We could start to determine who's going to the playoffs and who's not. What we're going to have for you is coming up next.
All right, well, everyone, thank you for listening to NFL Team Breakdowns. This was the Chicago Bears of the NFC North. Coming up next in about, 30 minutes, is going to be the Detroit Lions of the NFC North. That's going to be our last team in the NFC. We're going to be at the midway point of the NFL Team Breakdown segment. Thank you for listening. I'm Robert Diaz alongside me, Nick Rice. We hope you enjoyed another presentation of NFL Team Breakdowns.